Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to our event today. This event is about Yemen. My name is Chris Goronsky. I will be moderating the event today. Before we start, I just want to let everybody know that
تدركوا أن الترجمة متوافرة باللغة العربية والإنجليزية. الإنجليزية قناة 2 والعربية على القناة 3. إذن في فعاليتنا اليوم سوف ندرس آثار النزاع اليمني وكذلك تحديدا حول الوضع الإنساني في اليمن بأنه لا يمكن معالجته والتعامل معه كونه حالة وضع إنسانية ولكن ما لم ضع الإطار بناء على
in order to end the conflict, which will then end the humanitarian crisis. So today we have a couple of speakers with us. First to be speaking is Mr. Tahir Boumedra. He served as the chief of the United Nations Assistant Mission on Iraq from 2009 to 2012 in the Human Rights Office and has been an advisor to the Secretary General Special Representative for Iraq. Also, he served with the Penal Reform International Organization as a regional director in Yemen and helped implement an EU-financed program there that was training for prison directors. So he has a very intimate knowledge of the criminal justice system and how prisons operate in Yemen. Second, we will have Mr. Ahmed Quraishi. He is a researcher and writer from Pakistan. He's been working in the Gulf region for the past 24 years and is associated with Project Pakistan 21. Also, he has been studying in particular the situation in Yemen and the impact that it has on the countries on the periphery of the Middle East, particularly with an interest to Pakistanis living in the region and the impacts on Pakistan. I'd also like to just remind everybody that per rules from the Secretariat, there will be no photos. The organization, the organizers will be taping the session, so if you would like any information about that, you can contact the organizers afterwards. So with that, let me get started, and I will ask Mr. Tahir Boumedra, if you would like to take the floor, please.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's an opportunity this afternoon to look at the report of the group of experts, international and regional experts on Yemen, mandated by the Council of Human Rights, Resolution 3631. In fact, the mandate has been, in terms of time frame, it has been given 1 year, renewable. And the international and regional experts had to struggle in an extremely difficult situation to produce this report. It's not an easy task for anybody to monitor human rights, international humanitarian situation while the armed conflict is ongoing. Those of you who read the report know that the experts could not sometimes visit places they wish to visit for security reasons, obviously. And also, they were under tremendous pressure in terms of the time given to them to first present an oral report and to present at this session a report, a final report for the period allocated to them before or if the mandate is renewed. So it's a tremendous work, and I think they should be commended for this work, having delivered it on time as requested by the Human Rights Council. Before we go into examining the report itself, I would like to remind you with the guidelines for public reporting on human rights and humanitarian situations adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations in a declaration on fact-finding by the United Nations in the field of maintenance of international peace and security, which is the case of Yemen. So basically, the mission bearers or the experts are expected to bear in mind the relevant fact-finding efforts, including those undertaken by states concerned in the Yemen situation, the National Commission of Human Rights, and in the framework of the regional arrangements and agencies, as well as the international efforts led by the United Nations. And for your information and reminder, there was also, in parallel to the Human Rights Council's mandate for the experts, there is this panel of experts, international experts, established by the Security Council. And the panel of experts were also expected to report under Resolution 2216, to report to the Security Council the situation of the security international, what is threatening the international peace and security in Yemen. And the panel of experts, so let's refer to it from now on as a panel, and the group of international and regional experts will be referred to as the group of experts. So we have panel of experts to report to the Security Council, and we have the group of experts to report to the Human Rights Council. The group of experts started reporting by putting the report in a context. And from the beginning, they start talking about the situation as it was developing since 2011, and I quote the report saying that a popular revolution arose against the 33-year rule of Ali Abdullah Saleh. Resolution 3631 does not give any date where to start the reporting or the monitoring or the investigation. So for the panel, for the group of experts to have chosen this date of 2011, that's willingly or unwillingly, it relates the events in Yemen to the 2011 so-called Arab Spring. But those who are familiar with the situation in Yemen know very well that this situation did not start in 2011. In fact, it started in 2004. Since 2004, there have been 6 wars between the Houthis, based in Saada in the north, and the central government in Sana'a. And the founder, the father founder, the spiritual founder of the Houthi movement, or Houthi group, was Hussein Badruddin al-Houthi. Badruddin al-Houthi was already in 2004 fighting the central government, and he was killed in 2004 while fighting the government. That is the real context that brought this situation in Yemen is way before the 2011 events, the so-called democracy movement in Yemen. And then when we see the actors of the uprising in Yemen, we don't see those people who rose up calling for democracy involved in the armed conflict. They had never been involved in armed conflict. It was a peaceful movement calling for the regime change, but they never took up arms to fight the government. Those who took up arms to fight the government were the Houthi militias supported by Iran, and they went into expanding in Yemen, moving from their safe hold in Saada, moving to take up and occupy the capital. So probably we need to know who are the Houthis exactly. This is a movement. When it started in the 90s, it was with the aim of re-establishing the imama. Al-imama in Yemen is a religious tribal form of a state. And it's based on the sect of the Zaydi sort of school of thought in Islam. So they are a Muslim group with a kind of sect within the Shia, the global Shia school, and they are probably nearer in terms of theology to the Hanafi Sunni school of thought. So you see, we don't identify what's going on in Yemen as a pro-democracy movement that end up into the use of force and the toppling of the government, and in fact, disintegrating the state of Yemen. What happened is this Islamo political group wanted to establish a new regime, and they took up arms as early as 2004, and they fought 6 wars, and the last war is still ongoing. I wouldn't go into the details how the Houthis went into toppling the internationally recognized government and setting up their own authority over Sana'a and other areas occupied by the Houthi militias. But this issue is probably very well covered by Resolution 2216, 2015. This resolution has determined, let me read probably the content of the resolution Resolution 2201, 2015. This resolution reaffirms its strong commitment to the unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Yemen. Its commitment to stand by the people of Yemen. Its support for the efforts of the Gulf Cooperation Council and commending its engagements in assisting the political transition in Yemen. The resolution deplores the unilateral action taken by the Houthis to dissolve parliament and take over Yemen's government's institutions, which have seriously escalated the situation. The resolution expressed alarm at the acts of violence committed by the Houthis and their supporters, which have undermined the political transition process in Yemen and jeopardized the security, stability, sovereignty, and unity of Yemen. The resolution expressed a grave concern over reports of the use of child soldiers by the Houthi forces, Ansar al-Sharia, and also government forces. The group of experts, however, addressed this situation in Yemen by putting it in a context of popular revolution. Personally, I found it difficult to explain how a politico-religious movement that has been into the war with the central government for years would be qualified in the UN Human Rights Report as a popular revolution against the 33-year rule of Abdullah Saleh. That's, for your information, it's paragraph 17 of the report. Putting the ongoing armed conflict in Yemen in the narrow context of a pro-democracy uprising is an opinion of the group. And the mandate of the group is supposed to point out facts and not give opinions. Let's also address probably or have a look at the intervention of the Arab coalition and see its context, its legal framework. The toppling of the internationally recognized government led the President al-Hadi to leave Sana'a and take refuge in Aden. And the Houthis, supported by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, started gaining momentum and gaining surfaces and areas. At that point, al-Hadi left the country and took refuge in Sana'a, in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia. Now, when al-Hadi went to Saudi Arabia, he requested help and support. And as a response to this call for help, a number of African and Arab countries formed what is known as the coalition, Arab coalition, and started taking action against the Houthis in order to reestablish law and order and sovereignty and unity of Yemen. Besides the fact that the City Council has adopted a number of resolutions, including 2216, to support and commend the Arab coalition. This action of the Arab coalition, in fact, legally speaking, comes under the Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations, which permits self and collective self-defense, individual and collective self-defense, if an armed attack occurs. And this is what happened in the situation, because the Security Council successive resolutions have determined the situation as a threat of peace and security. Besides the legal framework of self-defense, there is also the right or the responsibility to protect principle that is recently has evolved to become one of the principles of international law. So there is a responsibility to protect the people of Yemen, and the coalition has put its action in that context. The situation is that we are under a bit of pressure of time, but I still have a long way to go. So
You have a couple more minutes.
a couple of more minutes will force me to summarize. I probably will start talking about the context of the mandate itself. The mandate, and you might relax about time a bit because it's important that I will explain the context of the mandate. The mandate has authorized or charged the group of experts to look, to examine extensively international violations of human rights, international humanitarian law, and related international law. Grosso modo, the mandate has dealt with the situation of human rights and international humanitarian law, but failed to examine the other issues under international law, including the situation that threatens international peace and security and the law and order in Yemen. So this is one of the issues that have not been covered by the report. So just to put it very briefly, that international law has two main branches. One of the branches called the Jus in Bello. Jus in Bello, that means international humanitarian law. The other branch, Jus ad bellum, is the use of force, the permitted situations where use of force is acceptable under international law. The Jus in Bello regulates the conduct of the war, the conflict, and the other branch of international law is the right to resort to use force. The right to use force does not allow a state using force to break international humanitarian law, of course. But the report should have focused on these two branches of international law as mandated by the Council of Human Rights. One could notice in the report that the experts, they focused a lot on breaches by what they call pro-government forces and addressed them in a large section of the report, while the other breaches by other actors, Houthis and others, they were all summarized in total in 6 paragraphs of the report. And strangely, there was a special report in the Annex 2 of the report of the experts, access restrictions by the government of Yemen. This is a large chunk of the report, while to balance the report, the report should have also contained access restrictions by what they called the de facto authority, meaning the Houthis. So this is something that should have been included in the report. I will not go into details. The chairperson is pushing a paper towards me. I will just raise this issue of the mapping of actors in the conflict. I'm sure I wouldn't read into the mind of the experts why they introduced this chapter, but it is right to sort of question what's the need of this mapping of actors in the conflict when you name the chain of command, all the authorities of the coalition forces. And the first name on the report starts with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and it goes in the hierarchy downwards to the officers in the field. The same with the United Arab Emirates, and the same with the government of Yemen and Houthis. And so impliedly, this mapping of actors in the conflict are the ones accountable for the human rights violations that have been reported. Otherwise, what's the need of including this annex? And I found this is rather dangerous in the sense that once people see their names on such public reporting, obviously it will be difficult for them to remain in their cooperation with the group of experts. The group of experts also used an index. It's called Joint Incident Assessment Team. The coalition, under pressure from international community, set up this joint incident assessment and studied about 70 cases, 71 cases of violations or alleged violations of human rights and humanitarian law. But when the group of experts considered these cases, the group of experts did not give us any sort of criteria for declaring this work of the joint incident assessment, whether it's been fair, independent, and objective or not. They simply declared that the JIT, or Joint Incident Assessment Team, they declared it to be rather partial. So they rejected the work of the... in all this, and in all fairness to the group of experts, I would say the task was not an easy one. The war was ongoing. They had to deliver a very, very large mandate, but they could have avoided a number of issues. Obviously, some of them I have mentioned, others I did not mention, which are in my paper that I think the Geneva International Center will probably publish it fully, so that you will read the paper and you will forgive me if I didn't cover all the points I'm supposed to cover. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tar. And, pardon me. I think it's been very important for you to provide some context on the origin of the Yemeni conflict, as well as the independent experts report, in particular the fact that you pointed out how the report limits itself to starting in 2011, and yet Houthi fighting with the government and much of the conflict started many years before that, as well as pointing out to us the Resolution 2201 from the UN Security Council that really set forward the fact that the acts of the Houthis in taking over the government were deplored, and that the Security Council demanded a return to a political process for achieving a resolution to the conflict. So next we have Mr. Ahmed Quraishi. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Monsieur Boumedra. The Yemen conflict is a classic example of the international community going in circles without taking decisive action, especially when the legal framework to resolve the conflict is available in several UN Security Council resolutions that provide, that identify the aggressors, that roll out or list the actions that need to be taken, and those resolutions also emphasize what sort or what type of political process needs to start. So when you have a legal framework that is ready to be implemented, it is surprising that we are still going in circles and discussing what comes first. Should we first start with ending the siege? Should we start first with going after the Arab coalition and the Yemeni government? And so forth. It's a lot of confusion, frankly, and going into the seeds of the conflict and so forth. I'm going to go into all of these points, but to simplify it very simply, the conflict is not really very complex. It's very simple. And if you go back to the UN Security Council resolutions, which were issued under Chapter 7, giving the international community and the UN the necessary power and tools to enforce those resolutions. It's surprising why all of us, really, everybody who's involved in this conflict is just going into circles. The root causes are very simple. They are two. One is the illegal takeover by the Houthi militia of government of the capital Sana'a in Yemen in 2014. And the second thing is the diplomatic and military support and intervention of the backers of the Houthi militia in the shape of the government of Iran that has been using this militia basically to settle scores in other areas. And I'm going to show you it's not just with the Gulf states. It goes beyond that. I'm going to go into that. So basically, that's the root cause, the Houthi militia taking over, number one, and number two, the political and armed support that the Houthi militias are getting. Both of these points are clearly laid out in the UN Security Council resolutions. And what these resolutions basically say as a solution, it's very simple. The solution is to start a political process and that political process, of course, would also help in ending the war, ending the humanitarian crisis, and of course, it would also end the intervention by the Arab coalition. Now, the issue right now here is that I see a lot of focus, for example, on the role of the Arab coalition, and this is. And I see this as a complete divergence from what the UN Security Council resolutions on Yemen were all about. The focus has now shifted really on ending the siege, the naval siege. The focus has shifted on, for example, the appendix that Monsieur Boumedra just pointed out in the report by the group of experts, which details, which mentions the names of the officials in the Yemeni government, the army, the governments of the Arab coalition. The entire focus is on that area, which is right. And Frank, I don't feel good when I say this. It makes me look bad when I say sort of underestimate the humanitarian crisis as a result of the role, not just of the Arab coalition, but also, of course, of the Houthis. But the fact of the matter is, just by going after the Arab coalition, or just by ending the siege around Yemen, you will not end the war. The war will not end, and this is the fact. The war will only end when you implement the UN Security Council resolutions, particularly on these 2 points: the Houthi militia takeover, which needs to be revoked, and number 2, and the diplomatic and the armed support that the Houthi militias are getting from outside players. Unless and until you do this, you will continue to have a crisis in Yemen. You may be able temporarily to alleviate some of the suffering if you end completely the siege around Yemen, or you completely tie the hands of the Arab coalition, but that would be a temporary solution. The conflict would continue. The war will not end. So basically, that's what needs to be done. Now, what is the international community really doing? I enjoyed just now listening to Monsieur Boumedra about the report of the group of experts, and they've done a tremendous job. There's no doubt about this. But it's not enough. They fail on 2 aspects. There's a pattern. The group of experts report followed that pattern. The pattern is what? That too much focus, which again, I hate to sound cold, it's important on the humanitarian crisis, but too much focus on the crisis, the humanitarian crisis, but too little focus on what caused it. 2 things in particular: the failure of the Houthi militia to involve themselves and engage in a political process to end the war and the humanitarian crisis, number 1. And number 2, the role of Iran really in stopping the Houthi militia to go and join the peace process for many reasons, not just because of its conflict with the Gulf Arab states, but I dare to float here the theory that Iran is actually stopping the Houthi militia from starting or joining a real peace process in order to use Yemen as a chip, as a card in the nuclear deal negotiations with the major powers. And I'm going to show you how that is happening. Just very quickly, too many points. I'm going to just shorten it, Chris, here. I'm not going to go into, Just to prove my point, I'm going to give you one example that comes from this month. The report by the group of experts came in early August. In early August, somewhere in mid-August, a group of Houthi militias traveled all the way to Beirut, to Lebanon, and they met with the leader of Hezbollah, which is a proxy militia of Iran. Everybody knows that. The picture, I don't know when the meeting really happened, but the picture was released on, I think, 22nd of August. A picture of about 4 representatives of the Houthi militia meeting with Hassan Nasrallah, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah. About a week from that date, the Houthis were supposed to show up early September here in Geneva with the delegation of the Yemeni government to start the peace talks to end the war and to end the humanitarian suffering. What happened? The Yemeni government delegation was here. It was here. The UN was here. The Houthis were nowhere. They failed to show up, and they gave no reason why they failed to show up. And let me just tell you what I think why they did not show up. Number 1, they did not show up because they were told by the country that is patronizing them, Iran, to stay put, not start the political negotiations right now, because Iran is waiting for progress on the Iran nuclear deal, and Iran wants to use the Yemeni card as a bargaining chip in the nuclear negotiations. So Iran basically would say, okay, we would take we would give, if you give us something in the Iran nuclear deal, we will give you the concession in the shape of allowing the Houthis to start a political process, which in turn will end the humanitarian crisis, and which in turn will also end the involvement of the Arab coalition. Now, nobody wants to end this war, really, frankly. I mean, who wants this war to continue and prolong? The Arab coalition? The Arab coalition is spending somewhere, and these are just figures, somewhere between $5 and $6 billion has spent so far on this war. And there's a stalemate, and the stalemate continues, and there's political pressure on the Arab coalition. So they get really no benefit out of prolonging this war. The Houthis, of course, are also in a stalemate. Who benefits really from continuing this war? Nobody really benefits. The only party that really benefits is the party that is stopping the Houthi militias from joining the Geneva peace talks that were supposed to be held early this month and didn't. The reason is very simple. Iran is using the Houthis as a bargaining chip, number one, against the Arab Gulf states, and number two, in the Iran nuclear deal negotiations. And you know what's really sad? You know what's really, really sad and disappoints me? What disappoints me is the fact that many European powers agree and accept to see Iran admit the Yemen card in the Iran nuclear negotiations. So it's okay for Iran to sit in the Iran nuclear negotiations with the major world powers and say, well, okay, if you give us this concession, maybe we will, allow the Houthis to go and join the peace process. So Iran is basically using Yemen, the Yemen card, as a bargaining chip, mainly in the Iran nuclear deal negotiations, and partially, of course, in its spat with the Gulf Arab states, even if this means prolonging the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. That doesn't matter to the government of Iran, and it doesn't matter to Hezbollah. But it's surprising that Yemenis, Houthis, of course, are Yemenis, and they're part of the social fabric of Yemen. They have no concern for that, and they're ready not to join Geneva peace talks, even if it means more suffering for their own people, just because it helps politically their patron, Iran. So basically, we have a pattern internationally, and we saw that in the report in August. Number one, there's no international outrage. Nobody is asking the Houthis, why are you not joining the peace process, number one. And number two, there is not enough international outrage on the supply of arms and weapons and not just the armed support to the Houthis, but the diplomatic support that Hezbollah and Iran are giving to this militia. Two things, I'm surprised, not enough international outrage. And we have the UN itself has tremendous evidences on this supply of weapons to the Houthis. I just want to show you one. I don't want to bore you with this thing, because I know that the Associated Press, which is a very credible news wire agency based in Washington, D.C. We have Agence France-Presse based in Paris. They actually have seen, their reporters and correspondents were actually given access to some of this evidence on Iran being busted, supplying the Houthis with weapons. I just want to show you very quickly this example, which was a damning evidence, really, frankly. Just very quickly. This was a ship called Jihan 1. It was busted somewhere in the year 2013. It was busted by the U.S. Navy, and the entire contents of the bust were shown to the media. You can see it was a huge bust. There were anti-tank, anti-helicopter missiles, advanced communication equipment, landmines, all sorts of really heavy weapons. So basically, this is just one example. The United Nations in New York has more evidence. There's much more detailed evidence. There's also very detailed evidence on the presence of military advisors from the IRGC, the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps, and especially from the Quds Force, which is the foreign arm of the IRGC. being present in Yemen at different times. At times, of course, there are conflicting figures depending on what area of Yemen you're talking about. There were reports from certain areas of Yemen of presence of several hundred military advisors from the Al-Quds force of the IRGC. And in other areas of Yemen, there were reports of the presence of trainers from Hezbollah, from Lebanon. And these are very, very well documented. There's no point. I was going through that. I thought, I could show all of that here, but there's no point in going through all of that because the evidence is available with the United Nations, and let me just point out, it's indisputable evidence. It's indisputable evidence. Of course, when this cache was caught, Iran did not deny that it was coming actually from the side of Iran, but it denied that it had anything to do with it. So the denial basically was not that this shipment, the ship itself was from Iran, and the ship was coming from the side of Iran, could be from any of the ports on the Iran side of the Gulf, but Iran just simply denied that the government of Iran had anything to do with this shipment. It's a very damning evidence. So basically Iran's involvement with the arming of the Houthi militia does not take center stage in all of the debate that we're seeing right now over Yemen, and the role of the Houthis in avoiding peace talks is also not being raised. And I honestly expected an international outrage, considering that the resolutions on Yemen are under Chapter 7 of the Security Council. I expected an outrage because the Houthis, without any reason, failed to show up in the Geneva talks earlier this month. And I thought the outrage would be similar to the outrage shown in the report by the panel of experts, but nothing at all. So basically, just to conclude, I could go a little bit more, but we have very little time. I just wanted to show actually why this whole conflict is really not about some Shia-Sunni conflict. It's not about the historical rivalry between Arabs and Persians. These are all excuses to let the conflict continue. These are excuses. The decisive action that the international community needs to take is very simple. Implement the UN Security Council resolutions that talk about rolling back the coup of 21 September 2014, and number two, end the foreign support that the Houthis are getting. Without doing these two things, even if you end the siege, even if you take the Arab coalition to task, the conflict will continue and we will not see end to it. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Ahmed. I appreciate your comments, and again, stressing the importance of the framework created by the UN resolutions, and also for helping enlighten us about the behind-the-scenes role played by Iran in the conflict. And again, stressing that in order to end the humanitarian crisis, we need to end the conflict, and that requires more than just looking at the humanitarian components of it. Unfortunately, due to our time constraints, I apologize, we're not going to be able to do Q&A as we had hoped. I would like to let everybody know that we have another side event tomorrow on the situation in Iraq in this same room. And I would also like to invite you all to join us for refreshments outside after this event. Please help me thank our speakers today. Thank you very much. So thank you all, and have a wonderful day.